Cowboy adopted a lost native child. Turned out to be a gorgeous Apache widow's daughter. The child had walked for so long she no longer felt her feet. Wind clawed at her skin, carrying sand and the smell of blood. Behind her, the land burned red beneath the sinking sun, a land that had swallowed everyone she loved. She stumbled once, then again, clutching a torn scrap of cloth pressed to her chest, the only thing left from her mother. When she fell for the last time, the world went silent, but for her ragged breath, then came the faint rhythm of hooves. Through the shimmer of dust, a tall man on horseback slowed to a stop. He studied the stillness, saw the small shape in the dirt, and something inside him cracked open. No child should die alone under the same sun that once warmed mine, he murmured, and the lonely rider turned toward the fallen girl. The sun sagged lower over the valley of Rio Puerco, spilling its last red light across the ridges of dry earth and wind-carved stone. The man lifted the limp child into his arms. Her skin burned with fever. Her lips cracked, and a faint tremor ran through her tiny fingers. Rowan Hale pressed his palm to her back and felt the weak rise and fall of breath. He tied his horse's reins to his belt and started toward home. Walking slow, the dust curling around his boots like ghosts of the dying day. The cabin came into view at the bend of the dry riverbed, a small square of weathered pine and a crooked porch leaning under its own weight. He had built it 12 years ago for a family that no longer existed. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and pine tar, the faint scent of a life once lived. Rowan laid the girl on the cot near the hearth and poured a cup of water from the tin kettle. She didn't stir, so he dipped his fingers and brushed a drop over her lips. A shiver passed through her. The fire popped, throwing orange light against the wall, where a child's rag doll still sat, a relic from another time. He caught himself staring at it too long, then turned away. Outside, the wind began its nightly moan, pushing fine red dust through the cracks of the shutter. Rowan knelt by the cot again, wiped the grime from the girl's face, and saw that beneath the dirt was a trace of blue paint along her jaw, the mark of an Apache child. His chest tightened. He had seen such marks before, long ago, during the years when settlers and tribes clashed across these lands. But this one was different. She was too small to understand any of it, too young to carry such sorrow. He set another log on the fire, its glow catching the edges of his face, revealing lines etched deep by wind and grief. For years he had lived by routine: fix the fences, check the herd, mend the roof, and keep the silence company. The world had taken more than it ever gave, yet still demanded he endure it. His wife, Elisa, had died giving birth to their only child, and the boy, Jonas, had followed her 3 winters later, taken by fever before his 4th birthday. After burying them by the cottonwood grove, Rowan had learned to move without feeling, only doing. He had stopped speaking to people, stopped looking too long at the sky, because even beauty hurt. Now, as the firelight played across the girl's small face, he felt a tremor in the stillness of his heart. She reminded him of Jonas, the same fragile hands, the same restless breathing in sleep. When she stirred in the night, mumbling something in a language he couldn't understand, he rose to tuck the blanket tighter around her. "Easy now," he whispered, though she couldn't know the words. The girl kidded, clutching the rag doll he had placed beside her. Rowan sat back on the stool, the light flickering over his calloused hands. He didn't know her name or where she came from, but as the wind hissed outside and the roof creaked like a tired old man, he realized he didn't need to know, not yet. For now, it was enough that she was breathing. When dawn crept pale and thin through the cracks, he found her eyes open, dark and wide, watching him without fear, but not quite trust. He smiled faintly, awkwardly, as though rediscovering how— "Morning, little one," he murmured. She blinked once, silent as a bird before flight. Rowan poured a bit of warm milk into a tin cup and handed it to her. She stared, hesitant, then took it with both hands. As she drank, sunlight brushed across her face, and something stirred in him, a quiet echo of life, returning to a house that had forgotten what warmth felt like. 3 days later, the wind came howling again from the south, sweeping the valley in a curtain of dust. Rowan was outside, hammering a loose board back into the corral fence when his horse lifted its head, ears flicking toward the horizon. He followed the animal's gaze and saw a figure emerging through the haze, a rider, alone, her dark silhouette wavering in the heat. Instinct told him to reach for his rifle, but something in the way she sat the saddle straight, steady, like someone carved from the land itself, made him pause. When she came closer, he saw the streaks of red paint across her cheeks, the tangle of raven black hair bound with deer hide, and eyes that gleamed sharp and wary as obsidian. The moment she saw the child sitting on the porch steps, her body stiffened, and the horse beneath her let out a low snort. She was off the saddle before Rowan could speak, running barefoot across the dirt. The little girl's cry broke the air, half joy, half disbelief, as she was swept into her mother's arms. Talahi knelt there in the dust, clutching her child so tightly it seemed she feared the world might steal her away again. She whispered something in Apache, voice breaking on the last word. Rowan stood a few steps away, silent, hat in hand. He had seen grief in all its forms, but nothing like this, the kind that trembled and healed in the same breath. When Talahi finally lifted her face, her eyes met his, and what he saw there wasn't gratitude but suspicion. Her gaze moved over the cabin, the tools, the rough hands that had tended her daughter, and stopped at the revolver hanging by his hip. "Why?" she asked, her English thick but clear enough. "Why did you keep her alive?" Rowan looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because I once prayed someone would do the same, if it were my own." She studied him, jaw tight, as if weighing the truth behind his words. "Many men with skin like yours kill us," she said quietly. "Not help." He nodded. "I know." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of dry sage and sweat between them. "But I'm not them." Talahi rose slowly, still holding the child, little Hawk. He had called her, and the girl pressed her small face into her mother's shoulder. For a long time, none of them spoke. Only the wind and the rattle of the loose fence wire filled the silence. Rowan stepped back, motioning toward the cabin. "You both should rest. She's still weak." His voice softened. "There's food inside, if you'd trust it." Trust. The word hung heavy in the air. Talahi hesitated, scanning the line of the horizon as though the very earth might betray her. Finally, she nodded once. Inside, the cabin was dim and warm. She moved with a kind of animal caution, never turning her back fully to him. Rowan poured hot water into a basin, gesturing for her to clean the dust from the girl's face. As she did, Talahi noticed the small rag doll on the cot. Her eyes narrowed, then softened. "Your child?" she asked. Rowan swallowed, the question landing harder than expected. "Was," he said. "A long time ago, for the first time." Her gaze wavered. She touched the doll gently, as if it were something sacred. The child yawned and leaned against her arm. "She dreamed," Talahi said in a low tone, "of a man who found her before the spirits did." Maybe dream was true. He didn't know how to answer that. Instead, he reached for another blanket and handed it to her. "There's plenty of room here," he said quietly. "Stay tonight. The storms aren't done yet." She looked at him, suspicion flickering with the faintest thread of relief. "We will stay," she replied. "Only for the night." Rowan nodded, though he knew better. In this land, one night often turned into forever. As darkness folded over the valley, the three of them sat in silence. One man, one woman, One child, each carrying ghosts of their own. Outside, the wind still moved over the red earth. But inside the small cabin, for the first time in many years, there was the fragile sound of breathing shared by more than one soul. Days slipped by like dust on the wind, soft and uncounted. At first, Talahi kept her distance. She spoke little, her English halting, her eyes always watchful. She rose before dawn to fetch water from the dry creek, gathered mesquite pods and sage leaves, and built small fires outside, instead of using the hearth inside the cabin. Rowan didn't stop her. He understood what it meant to need space to keep a small circle around yourself when the world had already taken too much. The girl, whom he still called Little Hawk, followed him everywhere. She trailed behind when he checked the fence line, her small footprints marking the sand beside his boots. When she laughed rarely and softly, it startled him more than the sound of thunder. One afternoon, he found Talahi kneeling by the riverbed, spreading herbs on a flat stone. She was grinding them with the back of a knife, her hands sure and graceful. "Medicine," she said when she noticed him watching. "For fever." "For fear." He nodded, squatting beside her. Never knew fear had a cure. She looked up at him, one corner of her mouth lifting. "Everything that lives has a cure. Or a price." The quiet between them stretched, full but not heavy. He told her how the fever had taken his boy. She didn't speak, but after a while, she touched the dust on the ground with her fingertips and drew a small spiral. "When something is taken," she murmured, "the wind still remembers the shape of it." That night, a sudden storm rolled in from the mountains. The wind screamed through the cracks, and rain lashed the roof until it groaned. The fire sputtered and went out. Rowan rushed to the barn to tie the horses. Talahi followed, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. The door banged in the wind as lightning ripped the sky open. When a plank came loose, he caught it with both hands, cursing under his breath, and she threw her weight against the wall beside him to keep it from giving way. They worked side by side, soaked to the bone. The rain, turning the red earth into slick mud. At last, the wind eased. Both stood panting, faces streaked with water and grit. She looked at him and gave a small laugh, unexpected, raw. It startled him into laughing too. For the first time, the storm inside the cabin wasn't the only one breaking. Over the next days, they began to move in rhythm. He taught her how to mend the corral with twisted wire. She showed him how to find edible roots in the rocky soil. She sang to Little Hawk and Apache, low and steady, while Rowan whittled new toys from scraps of cedar wood. At dusk, they sometimes sat by the fire in silence that no longer felt like distance. Once, when he burned his hand, lifting a kettle, she took it without hesitation and pressed it into a cool poultice. "You fight land," she said softly, "but land always wins. You must move with it." He nodded, letting her words sink into him like rain into thirsty ground. One morning, he caught her standing by the graves behind the cabin, the resting place of Eliza and Jonas. She was holding the rag doll, turning it gently in her hands. He approached quietly, unsure whether to speak. She looked over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "Your woman," she said. She was kind. Rowan hesitated. "She was light," he replied. And when she left, everything turned to shadow. Talahi set the doll back down, the gesture slow and deliberate. "The spirits send light again," she said. "Maybe you not see yet." Later that day, while Rowan repaired the water trough, Little Hawk tried to hand him a small feather. She'd found a hawk feather, golden at the tip. "Gift," she said shyly, one of the few words she'd learned. He smiled, tucking it into his hatband. Talahi watched from the doorway, her face unreadable, but her eyes softer than before. That evening, the three of them ate together for the first time. Talahi made stew from mesquite beans and venison. Rowan broke bread he'd baked that morning. Little Hawk sat between them, humming a tune half-remembered from her mother's tongue. The fire threw long shadows against the walls, painting their faces in shades of warmth and ash. Rowan looked across the table and caught Talahi's eyes for a heartbeat. Something passed between them, unspoken. Fragile. Alive. When the girl had fallen asleep, Talahi rose to clean the bowls. Rowan moved to help, but she shook her head. "You save her," she said quietly. "You save me." He started to speak, but she went on. "You give back breath that land tried to take." She rinsed the bowl in silence, then added, almost to herself, "Now I must learn how to give it back." That night, as the wind moved softly through the cottonwoods and the moon rose pale above the valley, Rowan lay awake, listening to the steady rhythm of two other hearts under his roof. The sound was strange, comforting, and terribly alive. For years, he had built walls of silence around himself. Now, for the first time, they were beginning to crack, not with pain, but with something far gentler. The calm in the valley lasted only until the next moon. One afternoon, while Rowan was working on the roof, he caught the faint echo of hooves, 3 of them, steady and sure, coming from the east trail. He knew that sound. It was the kind that carried trouble before it arrived. He climbed down, dusted his hands, and glanced toward the ridge. 3 riders crested the hill, their coats pale with trail dust, their guns glinting in the late light. The one in front wore a black hat and a grin sharp as a knife. Silas Dunn. Rowan felt the name like grit between his teeth. He'd known Dunn once years back, when the man ran a claim outside San Mateo and used whiskey and fire to take more than he ever earned. Rumor said he'd killed a native man in a land dispute last spring, and Rowan didn't doubt it. The riders slowed as they neared the cabin. Dunn's eyes caught the small figure of Little Hawk playing near the trough. "Well, I'll be damned," he drawled, spitting tobacco to the dirt. "Didn't figure you'd gone soft enough to keep company with savages." "Hail." Rowan stepped forward, his voice low. "Turn your horse around." "Silas, you don't belong here." Dunn laughed. "Don't belong, this here's open range, unless you plan to fence off the wind." His men chuckled behind him, ugly and eager. Dunn's gaze shifted toward the door, where Talahi now stood, half hidden in shadow. "Ain't that the squaw from Rio Mesa?" he said. "Her man used to ride with the Apache band that raided my camp. Guess you found what's left of him." Talahi didn't move, but her hand gripped the doorframe so tight her knuckles turned white. Rowan's jaw tightened. "You've said enough." Dunn leaned from his saddle, smirking. "Come on now. Rowan, you really think the folks in town will take kindly to you, harboring her kind? Maybe I ought to help you do what's right, send her back to the dirt where she belongs." The air between them went still. Rowan's hand hovered near the holster, but he didn't draw. "You're leaving," he said. Dunn's grin faded. "And if I don't," Rowan met his eyes, voice flat as the desert, "then you'll find out how far a man goes when he's got nothing left to lose." For a heartbeat, none of them moved. Then Dunn swung down from his horse. "Let's see about that." The moment cracked open like thunder. Rowan lunged forward, knocking the gun from Dunn's hand as it cleared the holster. The 2 men crashed into the dust, fists and boots colliding, the ground shaking beneath them. One of Dunn's men drew his revolver, but Talahi stepped from the doorway, a lit torch in her hand. "Enough!" she shouted. The fire flared in the wind, sparks leaping across the dry grass. The horses shrieked and reared as the torch hit the ground, flame catching the brittle weeds around the corral. Dunn froze long enough for Rowan to pin him, the smell of smoke thick between them. "Call them off." Rowan hissed. "Now." Dunn spat blood. "You're a fool. Hail. You think helping her makes you any less lost." Rowan's fist clenched around Dunn's collar. "Maybe it makes me human." He shoved him aside. grabbing a shovel to beat back the fire as Talahi and Little Hawk ran for the water trough. Together they doused the flames until the smoke thinned and the red glow dimmed to ash. When the last ember died, Dunn staggered to his horse. His men followed, muttering curses. Before mounting, Dunn looked back, eyes narrow. "You just made yourself a marked man. Folks'll hear about this. They'll come." Rowan wiped the sweat and soot from his face. "Then tell them to bring shovels," he said. "They'll need them." Dunn's laugh was hollow as the wind. Then he spurred his horse and vanished into the rising dust. Silence hung heavy afterward. The corral stank of smoke. The trough steamed with embers. Little Hawk clung to her mother's skirt, eyes wide and shining with tears she wouldn't let fall. Rowan sank onto a log, his breath ragged. His knuckles bled, though he barely noticed. Talahi knelt beside him, touching the back of his hand. "You could have killed him," she said quietly. "I've done enough killing." Rowan murmured, "Didn't change the world any." She studied his face, the hard lines, the exhaustion behind his eyes, and saw in him something beyond pity or pride. She tore a strip from her shawl and wrapped his hand. "He will come again," she said. "I know. You are not afraid." He looked toward the horizon, where the smoke faded into the dusk. "Fear's just another kind of memory," he said. "I've lived with worse." As night fell, the three of them worked in silence, cleaning the soot from the porch, checking the horses, making sure no ember still burned. When at last they went inside, Rowan poured water into the basin to wash his hands. The water turned red with dust and blood. Talahi watched him from the firelight, her expression unreadable, her hands trembling just slightly. "Why risk yourself for me?" she asked. He paused, eyes on the flame. "Because I've already lost everything once. I'm not doing it again." She stepped closer, the glow touching her cheek. For a moment, he thought she might say more, but she only nodded and whispered, "Then may the spirits see your courage." Outside, the last embers of the fire flickered like dying stars. Inside, the faint cry of Little Hawk broke the silence, and Talahi went to her, gathering her daughter into her arms. Rowan watched them both, a weary peace settling over him, even as he knew peace would not last. The land was never done, testing the hearts of those who tried to live upon it. That night the wind settled over the valley, soft as a breath after pain. The cabin smelled of smoke and wet ash. The fire burned low, and the only sound was the soft hiss of wood giving up its last bit of flame. Rowan sat at the table, his shirt torn, the bruises along his arms turning purple under the lamplight. Across from him, Talahi bent over a pot of boiled water, stirring herbs that smelled of pine and sage. She wrung a cloth and came to him without a word. When she pressed it to his knuckles, the sting made him flinch. "Hold still," she murmured, her voice husky from the smoke. "You fight with hands made for building." He gave a dry laugh. "They don't remember how to build much anymore." She kept working, silent except for the soft rhythm of cloth against skin. Outside, the horses stamped and sighed. The child had fallen asleep near the hearth, clutching the old rag doll against her chest. Talahi followed Rowan's gaze toward her daughter and said quietly, "She does not dream of fear tonight." He nodded, not trusting his voice. When she finished, she sat across from him again, the lamplight caught in her hair, turning the strands of black to bronze. She seemed smaller now. The edge of defiance eased into something quieter. "You should go north," she said after a while. "When sun rises, leave this place before he returns." Rowan leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking. "I built this place with my hands," he said. "Buried my family here. I won't run." Her eyes met his, sharp and searching. "Then you die here," he hesitated, then spoke slowly. "Maybe, but I'd rather stand for something than keep walking away from everything." Talahi looked down, her fingers tracing the rim of the table. When my husband was killed, I wanted only revenge. I prayed for the chance to take one life for the one I lost. But now, she paused, lifting her gaze to him. Now I see you spared his killer. Why? Rowan stared at the small flame in the lamp. Because if I kill again, I'll bury the last part of me that still remembers love. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy but gentle, like the weight of rain clouds before they break. Then Talahi reached for the kettle, poured 2 tin cups of water, and slid one across the table. Her hands brushed his for an instant. Rough meeting, rough. Warmth against warmth. It was nothing more than touch, yet it carried the quiet intimacy of confession. Later, when the lamps dimmed, she rose to leave. But at the door, she stopped and turned. You have the spirit of a wolf, she said softly. Alone too long, but still watching the stars. Rowan smiled faintly, the first true smile she had seen from him. And you, he asked, what spirit watches you? She thought for a moment. A hawk, she said, always above, but never free from the sky. Then she stepped into the darkness. He sat there for a long while after she was gone, listening to the night settle into itself. The firelight flickered against the walls, painting shifting shapes that might have been memories or ghosts. At last he rose, crossed to where Little Hawk slept, and adjusted the blanket over her small shoulders. The child stirred, mumbling a word in Apache he didn't know, but the tone of it was peaceful. He looked toward the door, where Talahi had gone, and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't know whether he meant her or the world for giving him something to care about again. By dawn, the air smelled of rain. The valley shimmered under a thin veil of mist. Rowan found Talahi outside, sitting near the graves behind the cabin. She was speaking softly in her native tongue, her hands folded around a small bundle of herbs. He stood quietly, waiting. When she finished, she placed the bundle between the graves and whispered, "For those who walked before us." Then she looked up. "I said prayer for your woman and your son, so they see peace where they are." Rowan swallowed hard. "They would have liked you," he said. The corners of her mouth lifted slightly. "I like them already. They give you back to the living." They stood in silence, the morning breeze threading between them. Then she turned toward him. "I will write to my people," she said. "Tell them I found my daughter. Ask them for blessing to return." He nodded slowly. "You'll leave, yes," she said, "but not forever." Something twisted in his chest, a quiet ache he hadn't felt in years. "You don't owe me anything," he said. Her eyes softened. "I know. That is why I will come back." When the sun rose fully, its light spilled across the red earth, golden and clean after the storm. The smoke from the night's fire drifted in thin curls into the sky. Rowan watched her walk back toward the cabin where Little Hawk waited. For the first time in a long while, he felt the world turning, not against him, but with him, slow, heavy, inevitable, like the river cutting through stone. Spring returned quietly to the valley of Rio Puerco. The rains had passed, leaving the air washed clean and the cottonwoods shining new green against the red cliffs. Rowan mended the fence one last time that morning, the smell of wet earth heavy around him. Behind him, the cabin's door stood open, letting out the soft hum of a woman's voice. Talahi was inside, helping Little Hawk pack the few things they owned into a woven saddlebag. The child moved from table to cot, tucking away the rag doll Rowan had given her, now patched with new cloth and bright thread. Every so often, she glanced at him through the doorway, smiling shyly, as if she knew the weight hanging between the adults, but didn't yet understand its shape. When the bags were tied, Talahi stepped out into the sunlight. She wore a clean cotton dress Rowan had mended for her, and over it, a shawl dyed the color of river clay. Around her neck hung the same string of hawk bones, but now it gleamed with fresh polish. "The messenger left at dawn," she said. "He will carry my letter to the elders. They will know we live." Rowan nodded, setting down his hammer. "How long till you hear back?" "Maybe many suns," she said. "Maybe none. But I must ask. It is our way." He looked toward the horizon, where heat shimmered off the rocks. "And if they say you shouldn't return," she didn't answer right away. "Then I will make my own blessing," she said softly. They walked together to the grove behind the cabin, the same place where Eliza and Jonas rested. The earth there was dark and sweet with spring rain. Talahi knelt and placed something at the foot of the wooden crosses, the rag doll, now dressed in a scrap of beaded cloth. "For the woman who gave him love," she whispered, "and the child who made his heart remember." Rowan stood beside her, hat in hand, eyes shadowed. "They'd have wanted you to find peace," he said. She looked up, her eyes deep with warmth. "Peace is not found," she said. "It is chosen." For a moment they just stood there, listening to the slow breath of the valley, the rustle of grass, the murmur of wind in the cottonwoods. Then Talahi turned, brushing the dirt from her knees. "We will go to the mountains when the sun climbs higher. My people wait beyond Sierra Nacimiento. It is not far." Rowan's throat tightened. He nodded once, as if any more might undo him. "I'll ride with you part of the way," he said. She smiled faintly. "I hoped you would." They set out just after noon, the air warm and full of cicadas. Little Hawk rode between them on Rowan's horse, her small hands gripping the saddle horn. The world seemed endless again, no smoke, no blood, only sky and open road. When they reached the high ridge, Talahi slowed her horse and looked back. Below them, the cabin crouched small and silver in the sunlight, smoke trailing gently from its chimney. "You will stay?" she asked. "For now," Rowan said. "There's fences to mend, always will be." She tilted her head, studying him. "You fix fences between land," she said. "Maybe now you learn to open the ones inside." He gave a short laugh, quiet but real. "You have a way of making hard things sound easy." She smiled, the wind catching her hair, turning it to black silk against the sun. "Then I will come back to see if you did." They rode until the trail bent toward the mountains. There, the air turned cool, filled with pine and distant thunder. Talahi reined in and dismounted, lifting Little Hawk from Rowan's saddle. The girl hugged his neck tightly. "You come?" she asked, her voice small. He touched her cheek. "Someday," he said, "but you have to go now." She nodded, eyes glistening. Talahi placed a hand over Rowan's heart. "For what you lost," she said quietly, "and what you found. Again, thank you." He covered her hand with his. "You gave more back than you know." They stood like that, for a long moment, two lives shaped by loss, bound by something wordless and kind. Then she mounted her horse and turned toward the distant line of blue where her people waited. Rowan watched until they became no more than shadows against the light, the hawk bones at her throat catching one last flash of sun before the trail swallowed them. When he finally turned back, the valley spread below him, red, vast, alive. The wind rose again, carrying the scent of sage and the echo of hooves long gone. Rowan tipped his hat, the hawk feather still in its band, fluttering gently, and whispered to no one. "Safe journey." He started down the ridge, slow and steady. Behind him, the cabin stood waiting, smoke curling upward like a prayer. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of silence. Instead, he heard the faintest whisper of laughter in the wind, the sound of a child, a woman, and the promise of return. And in that moment, between red earth and blue sky, Rowan Hale knew that forgiveness had found its place not in words, but in the spaces left open for love to grow again.